Hi Jim, and thanks a million for agreeing to give us an economic outlook today, and particularly for FBD customers. I know we really appreciate it. Just have sort of 2 or 3 questions we'd like to ask you. And one is, what do you think are the main issues of facing the Irish economy at the moment, both domestically and internationally?
Well, I think from the Irish economy's perspective, the most important thing at this stage is the international economic environment. And the news there is reasonably good. You know, we've seen clear evidence that the global economic cycle has bottomed out. We're starting to see recovery starting to build, and I would expect over the next couple of years a gradual recovery to start happening internationally. The challenge for Ireland in that context is to ensure that as the international economic cycle improves, we're in a position to exploit that improvement. In that context, I think there's a number of issues we need to sort out to get the economy fit to exploit that international recovery. Firstly, we need to sort out the banking situation. I think the NAMA model is really the only game in town, provided the amendments are taken on board, which they will be at this stage. So that needs to happen. We need to get banks back into the business of lending money into the economy again in a prudent manner. Secondly, we need to get the competitiveness of the Irish economy in check. In other words, we just need to reduce the whole cost base of Ireland PLC across the board. I'm talking about wages, I'm talking about professional fees, I'm talking about local authority charges, energy and so on. We just need to bring the cost of doing business down. That is starting to happen. That will improve the competitiveness of the economy over the next couple of years. The third issue is obviously the public finances. You know, there's a gaping gap there. We're going to borrow up to 25 billion euro this year. That is not a sustainable situation. And over the next 2 or 3 years, it's absolutely incumbent on government to continue to take measures to reduce that deficit. I think if we can sort all of those issues domestically, we should then be in a position to benefit to some extent from the international economic recovery. But for Ireland, you know, clearly the next couple of years represent a pretty challenging environment, but I think we can do it.
Okay, thanks for that. Jim, the budget in December, what do you think the government will do in December to try and rectify things?
Well, the government has been handed 2 menus of options in recent months. One is the Board Smith-Newer report, which is recommending a lot of cutbacks in public spending. The second is the report from the Commission on Taxation. I think there's not an awful lot they will be able to do on the tax side at this stage, because increasing taxes and broadening the tax base, for example, introducing a property tax in the middle of an economic recession, does not appear very sensible to me. So I think the tax reform agenda is longer term. I don't think we're going to see very much of it in the budget in December. We may see a few changes, such as the treatment of children's allowances and a few other changes like that, but no dramatic changes. I think that the focus of the last 2 budgets was on increasing taxes. I think we've gone far enough in that regard, because it is very difficult to tax an economy out of recession. I think now they need to start focusing in on the spending side seriously. So I think what they will have to implement in the budget in December are serious cutbacks in public spending.
Okay. And what would you like to see them maybe doing? I mean, if it was your sort of wish list, what would you like to see them doing in December?
Well, on the tax side, as I say, I don't believe they should increase the tax burden any further at this juncture. In fact, I would like to see a cut in the VAT rate, for example, which I think would give a competitiveness boost to Irish businesses and actually would end up generating more revenue. So it would be a revenue positive measure. I think that's needed. I think the budget also needs to send out clear signals that the tax burden on the personal sector is not going to rise any further, because consumers are very nervous and scared at the moment about what the future tax burden is going to be like. So you need to dispel that uncertainty. And another, I suppose, tax move I would like to see from a business point of view would be tax incentives for the SME sector particularly. You know, I think the SME sector needs to be encouraged to get out there and invest at the moment. And indeed, if some sort of employment subsidy was possible, I think that would be very desirable, because, you know, the key challenge for businesses is to actually hold on to existing staff numbers. On the spending side, you know, we spend too much in running the country. Unfortunately, most of the spending occurs in areas that are incredibly sensitive from a political perspective, social welfare and public sector pay being the two dominant spending areas. I think we are going to have to see some cutback and tightening up in the social welfare regime. I also think that we're going to have to see some further pay cuts in the top echelons of the public sector, because the bottom line is we just have to bring the cost of running the country back into line with taxation revenue.
Okay, and finally, Jim, on a personal finance basis, I suppose as we were approaching the sort of the self-assessment tax deadline, October the 31st, just I know a lot of FBD customers and Irish consumers are feeling that they're under pressure in their pockets at the moment. Just what do you feel about sort of retirement provision and sort of pension planning at the moment? Would you have any advice?
Well, I think in the middle of an economic recession, it's natural that we all take a very short-term view on the world, how we're going to get out of the current crisis. So people take their eye off the longer-term imperatives. And one of those imperatives is obviously to make sure that when you retire, you have an adequate pension provision in place. Otherwise, you will go into a cycle of poverty. So I think notwithstanding the current short-term difficulties, I still believe it is in everybody's best interest to look at the longer term pension provision. So I think where at all possible, everybody should be out there putting as much money as possible into their pensions. Obviously, the performance of pensions over the last couple of years has been pretty poor against a very difficult global economic backdrop. The good news now is that the global equity cycle is in a strong recovery phase, which I would expect to continue over the next couple of years. So a lot of the losses that have been suffered in pensions will be gradually recovered over the next couple of years. So I think people need to take a long-term view on this. There are very good tax incentives still in place for contributing to your pension scheme. It's obviously in your long-term interest to do so in order that you have an adequate income when you retire. I suppose people perhaps should maybe take a little bit more caution in terms of where they invest their pension funds. So make sure there's diversification in there, make sure that the risk is properly controlled. And for some people, a move towards more safer capital guaranteed assets might be the way to go in their pension schemes. For others who are a long way away from retirement, I still think the equity route is primarily the best one in the long term.
Okay, Jim, that's great. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.